October 18, 1965. The mountains southeast of Kamduk. The clouds are low and thick, the kind that swallow a helicopter whole. Rain, bad visibility, the kind of night you'd scrub a mission any other night. But the team is already on the ground, deep inside Laos, the first covert cross-border recon mission MACV-SOG ever ran. Secret from almost everyone, officially deniable to everyone else. Captain Larry Thorne had done his job. He got them in safely. Now he's in the command ship, orbiting in the murk, waiting for their first radio check. 5 minutes after he gets the call that the team is in, he turns the helicopter back toward base. 5 minutes after that, the helicopter disappears. They'd find the wreckage eventually. The Vietnamese crew, they'd find. Larry Thorne, nothing. No body, no sign, just gone. For years, the men who served with him refused to believe he was dead. They'd toast his health every year. They said if any man alive could survive a crash in those mountains and walk out, it was him. They weren't wrong to think that, because the man they knew had already survived things that should have killed him, multiple times, across 3 different wars, under 3 different flags, fighting the same enemy for his entire adult life. This is the story of Lauri Törni, born Finnish, fought as a German, buried as an American, the only man most people have never heard of who deserves to be in the same sentence as the greatest soldiers who ever lived. Lauri Alan Törni was born on May 28, 1919, in Viipuri, a port city on the Karelian Isthmus, right at the fault line between Finland and Russia. His father was a sea captain. That detail matters, not because it's poetic, but because Lauri grew up understanding 2 things from the time he was small. The world was bigger than Finland, and men who wanted to matter in it had to be willing to go somewhere dangerous. He was athletic from the start. Boxing, skiing, cross-country endurance. Not the kind of kid who sat still. He finished business school, joined the Civil Guard, and in 1938, at 19 years old, voluntarily enlisted in the Finnish Army before his mandatory service even began. He joined the 4th Independent Jager Infantry Battalion on the Karelian Isthmus, practically on Russia's doorstep. In November 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland. Törni's battalion deployed in Row 2, and then the brutal battles along Lake Ladoga, where Soviet columns pushed in expecting a walkover. What they got was something that shocked the world. Finland didn't fold. The Finnish soldier, lighter, faster, trained for this terrain since childhood, often fighting on skis through forests and over frozen lakes, bled the Red Army white. The Soviets lost somewhere between 125,000 and 170,000 men in what became known as the Winter War. Against a country 50 times larger, that ratio is almost impossible to explain unless you were there, watching men like Lauri Törni. Along Lake Ladoga, Törni took part in the destruction of several Soviet divisions trapped in encirclement battles. Entire Red Army units cut off in the forests, systematically dismantled. His commanders noticed him, not because he was reckless, but because he was effective, calm, and when things got hard, he didn't look for a way out. He looked for a way through. By the time the Winter War ended in March 1940, with Finland battered, exhausted, and forced to cede the isthmus, including Viipuri, Törni's hometown, he'd been commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant. He was 20 years old. His home city now belonged to the Soviet Union. His family, like 400,000 other Karelians, had been evacuated and displaced. The war was over. His personal war with the Soviets was just beginning. After the Winter War, Finland found itself in an impossible position. The peace it had signed with Stalin felt less like an agreement and more like a pause. The Soviets had taken what they wanted, and everyone knew the appetite didn't stop there. When Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, and Finland saw a chance to reclaim its lost territory by joining the campaign in the East, the government made the call. What followed, the Finns called the Continuation War. It was their war, their land, their reason. Törni had spent the gap between wars training hard. In mid-1941, he traveled to Vienna for 7 weeks of instruction with the Waffen-SS, mountaineering, cold weather operations, the kind of specialized knowledge you can't get from a standard infantry school. He came back to Finland a sharper instrument. We need to address the Waffen-SS Association directly, because you deserve a straight answer. Törni was not a member of a death squad. He was not involved in the Holocaust. The Finnish Volunteer Battalion of the Waffen-SS was a frontline infantry unit that fought exclusively against the Red Army on the Eastern Front. Finland was not a formal Axis member. Finnish military leadership maintained independence from German command throughout the war. For Törni specifically, a man whose hometown had been taken, whose family had been driven from their land, the motivation was anti-Soviet. He wanted his country back. Whether that resolves every moral question is a conversation reasonable people can have. What the record shows is that he fought the same enemy he'd always fought. In the continuation war, he rose quickly. By 1943, Finnish High Command gave him his own unit, a deep penetration raiding force that became known simply as Detachment Törni. Its symbol was a capital T crossed by a diagonal lightning bolt, and the men who wore that symbol became some of the most feared operators on the Finnish-Soviet front. Törni took small groups of men behind Soviet lines, sometimes days deep into enemy territory, harassing supply routes, gathering intelligence, ambushing formations that thought they were safe. He drilled his men relentlessly. Physical fitness was non-negotiable. He expected mastery of the puukko, the traditional Finnish fighting knife. He expected fluency in the forest at night, in winter, in conditions that would stop most soldiers cold. The Soviets noticed. They feared the unit's ability to appear and vanish in terrain they couldn't master the way the Finns could. When the Red Army put a bounty on Törni's head, 3 million Finnish marks, it wasn't for show. He had hurt them that badly. One of the men who served under him during this period was Mauno Koivisto, a young reconnaissance soldier who years later would become the president of Finland. He served under Törni's command at the Battle of Ilomantsi. That's not a footnote. That's the kind of detail that tells you what kind of leader Törni was. The summer of 1944 brought the defining action of his Finnish career. The Red Army launched a massive counterattack to retake the Karelian Isthmus. 3 days after D-Day, Törni's unit broke a Soviet encirclement attempt, inflicting heavy casualties and buying time for Finnish forces to regroup. Then came Ilomantsi, in July and August 1944, the final major Finnish-Soviet engagement of the entire continuation war. Törni's detachment had been reduced to fewer than 100 men. They were ordered to hold a critical crossroads. Facing them, 2 full Soviet regiments, roughly 4,000 soldiers. What he did next is the kind of thing that sounds invented. He split his already small force into even smaller groups. Faster, more mobile, harder to pin down, and move between them personally, directing counterattack after counterattack, creating the illusion of a much larger defending force. The Soviets, unable to understand what they were fighting or where the next blow would come from, halted their advance. The Finnish main force pulled back and regrouped. Törni's 100 men had stopped 4,000. On July 9, 1944, Lauri Törni was awarded the Mannerheim Cross, Finland's highest decoration for valor in combat. He was 25 years old. He'd earned it. In September 1944, Finland signed an armistice with the Soviet Union. The terms required Finland to expel German forces from its territory, which led to the Lapland War, a grinding campaign in the Finnish north that ended with the Germans retreating as much of Lapland burned behind them. The Finnish army demobilized. Törni found himself out of a uniform, his homeland secure on paper, the Soviets still next door, and his instinct that the fight wasn't really over proving difficult to quiet. In early 1945, he was recruited into a resistance network, organizing guerrilla fighters in case the Soviet Union pushed further into Finland. He traveled to Germany for training, and when he couldn't get transport back home, joined a German unit fighting east of Berlin in the war's final weeks. The war ended. Törni surrendered to British forces. escaped from a POW camp in northern Germany, and made his way back to Finland in June 1945. He was arrested by the Finnish state police, Valpo, almost immediately. He escaped. Arrested again in April 1946, tried for treason, specifically for continuing to serve in the German army after Finland's armistice. Convicted, sentenced to 6 years, sent to prison. He escaped again. Recaptured, sent to a harder facility. He stayed this time. In December 1948, the Finnish president issued him a pardon. He walked out. 3 arrests, 2 escapes, a pardon. He was 29 years old, and Finland, the country he'd fought for across 2 wars, the country that gave him his highest honor, had convicted him of treason. It's not hard to understand why he left. He crossed into Sweden on foot, working his way through the Finnish officer diaspora. In 1950, he got onto a cargo ship. When it got close to the coast of Alabama, near Mobile, he jumped overboard and swam to shore. He claimed political asylum, made his way to Brooklyn, where a Finnish-American community had settled. He worked as a carpenter, as a cleaner. He waited. A Finnish-American veteran named Paavo Fleming recognized immediately what Lauri Törni was and brought his case to William Wild Bill Donovan, the former chief of America's wartime intelligence service, the OSS, now working as an attorney. Donovan had heard of Törni. He secured his legal residency. Then, in 1953, a door opened that hadn't existed before. Congress had passed the Lodge-Philbin Act in 1950, allowing foreign nationals to enlist in the U.S. Army and earn citizenship after 5 years of honorable service. More than 200 Eastern European veterans enlisted under it before it expired in 1959. Lauri Törni was one of them. In January 1954, a Finnish army captain who'd commanded his own elite raiding unit, earned his country's highest honor, and fought in 3 wars over 6 years, reported for basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey, as a private. His name on the paperwork, Larry Allen Thorne. He didn't complain about starting at the bottom. He understood what the American Army was and what he needed to prove. He was already an expert in skiing, mountaineering, survival, and guerrilla tactics, skills the Army desperately needed as it stood up its new special forces. He taught those skills. He also learned. He went to airborne school. He earned his citizenship in 1957, attended officer candidate school, and got commissioned as a first lieutenant. He made captain in 1960. He was posted to the 10th Special Forces Group at Bad Tölz, West Germany, right at the foot of the Alps, the kind of terrain he'd trained in half his life. He fit in immediately. His reputation among the Green Berets grew fast, and it grew for good reason. In 1958, he was second in command of the mission that sent a Special Forces team into the Zagros Mountains of Iran to locate and secure the wreckage of a downed aircraft before sensitive materials fell into the wrong hands. Brutal, remote country. The kind of mission that required someone who'd operated in mountains his whole life and genuinely didn't rattle. Thorne was that person. Robin Moore, writing in his 1965 book, The Green Berets, based the lead character of his first chapter on Thorne, a fictionalized version of a real man who was already something of a legend among the people who mattered. But he wanted more than reputation. He wanted a war, and by 1963, one was waiting. Thorne deployed to South Vietnam in November 1963, commanding a Special Forces ODA in the Mekong Delta. His team ran civilian irregular defense group camps, training and leading local South Vietnamese fighters, mountaineered tribesmen, anyone willing to fight the Viet Cong in their own backyard. Classic Special Forces doctrine. Go to the edge, build the capacity of local forces, operate in places the conventional army couldn't or wouldn't go. He was 44 years old. He'd been fighting, in one form or another, for over 2 decades. And he was still one of the best operators in the U.S. Army. The jungle was different from everything he'd known. Finland had been cold forests and frozen lakes, terrain he'd grown up in. Vietnam was dense tropical growth, heat, mud, rivers that didn't behave like rivers. He adapted. That's what he'd always done. Read the terrain, understand its logic, use it. His ODA got into firefights. He earned 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star for bravery in the Mekong Delta. His first tour ended in 1964. He went back home, briefly, then he came back. His second tour began in February 1965. Shortly after arriving, he transferred to MACV-SOG, Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, Studies and Observations Group. That name is deliberately bland. MACV-SOG was one of the most classified units in the American military, running covert operations the government officially denied were happening. Cross-border missions into Laos and Cambodia, reconnaissance deep behind North Vietnamese lines, the kind of work that required operators who could keep a secret and handle themselves in situations where there was no one coming to help. Thorne was assigned as operations officer. He flew reconnaissance over eastern Laos personally, getting eyes on terrain where his teams would operate. He helped write the standard operating procedures MACV-SOG would use for years. He was building something that would outlast him. In September 1965, Washington approved Operation Shining Brass, the first coordinated effort to send recon teams across the border into Laos to find and hit the Ho Chi Minh Trail supply network. Tight restrictions, no deeper than 50 kilometers into Laos. Deniable cover stories if teams were captured. The stakes were enormous. If it worked, it could change the shape of the war. The first mission was scheduled for October 18, 1965. The weather that week had been terrible. 3 straight days of rain and heavy overcast had scrubbed the launch repeatedly. On October 18th, a pilot found a hole in the cloud cover, just enough to get through. Recon Team Iowa assembled at Cam Duc Special Forces Camp. 2 Americans, a South Vietnamese Army lieutenant, and 7 Nung fighters. They were going in to locate North Vietnamese activity on a suspected truck terminus along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, about 20 kilometers inside Laos. Cover story if captured. They were searching for a downed American cargo plane. 2 South Vietnamese Air Force CH-34 King B helicopters launched from Cam Duc. One would carry the team down through the gap in the clouds to the landing zone. The other, the command ship, would orbit nearby, carrying the operations officer, ready to coordinate support or react to anything that went wrong on the ground. Larry Thorne was supposed to have someone else on that command ship. He volunteered to go himself. That's in the official record. His Distinguished Flying Cross citation states it plainly. Due to the extreme hazards of the mission, he volunteered to accompany the aircraft in place of the assigned individual. He wasn't ordered there. He put himself there. The insertion went in. The team hit the landing zone. They were on the ground in Laos, the first MACV-SOG cross-border team ever inserted. Thorne got the radio confirmation. We're in. He turned the King B back toward Cam Duc. 5 minutes later, in the low cloud and mountain terrain, the helicopter went down. A forward air controller orbiting above reported it. Search aircraft went up almost immediately. The wreckage was found on a steep jungle slope, one rotor blade driven 25 meters up into a tree. The Vietnamese crew was recovered. 3 men who'd been doing their job and died doing it. Larry Thorne was not there. No body, no trace. The Army listed him missing in action. Then, in October 1966, declared him presumed killed. In South Vietnam, not Laos, because acknowledging where he actually was would have meant acknowledging the mission existed. The men who'd served with him in Special Forces didn't believe he was dead. He survived too much. He'd escaped too many times. There were rumors for years that he'd survived the crash, been captured, was alive somewhere in the highlands. His family believed it. His former soldiers toasted his health every year. He was 46 years old when the helicopter went down. He'd been fighting continuously, in one form or another, since he was 20. For 34 years, the question had no answer. Lauri Törni, Larry Thorne, was officially dead, but never confirmed. His name was on the corpse of the missing at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, which is where the military puts the names of people it hasn't been able to bring home. In July 1999, a joint U.S. and Vietnamese investigative team went to the crash site. The American and Finnish ambassadors to Vietnam were there. A nephew of Törni's named Judah Rice had made the trip from Finland. A small ceremony was planned, a closing, one way or another. The site was brutally difficult, a steep mountain slope, dense jungle. The team had to cut steps into the hillside and string rope handholds just to work the ground safely. They found scattered wreckage across the slope. One rotor blade still in a tree decades later. Buried in the earth beneath the debris, they found remains. The nephew had brought something with him, a small plate bearing the symbol of Detachment Törni, the T with the diagonal lightning bolt that Lauri's men had carried during the continuation war. He left it there on that hillside in Vietnam, next to where his uncle had died. A Vietnamese colonel who attended the ceremony had fought for the Viet Cong in that area during the war. He paid his respects. The remains were flown to Hanoi, then back to the United States. In December 2002, the Department of Defense officially identified the remains of Major Larry Thorne. On June 26, 2003, he was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. His headstone reads, Larry Thorne. He is the only former member of the Waffen-SS buried at Arlington. He is also the only individual known to have fought communist forces under 3 separate national flags, Finland, Germany, and the United States, across 3 separate conflicts spanning a quarter century. In 2010, the U.S. Army Special Forces Regiment named him its first honorary member. The 10th Special Forces Group presents the Larry Thorne Award annually to its best ODA. A Special Forces Association chapter and a headquarters building carry his name. In Finland, military museums in 2 cities maintain permanent exhibits dedicated to him. The men who served in his detachment formed a guild to keep his memory alive, and it still meets. Here's the thing about Lauri Törni that I keep coming back to. He spent his entire adult life fighting for a cause, his homeland, his people, his particular vision of a world without Soviet domination, and he never actually won. Finland survived, but ceded Karelia and lived under Soviet pressure for decades. Germany collapsed. Vietnam fell. Every flag he fought under lost something or lost outright. And he just kept going, not out of stubbornness or recklessness or some death wish, out of a conviction so fundamental it survived defeats, prison sentences, exile, displacement, and starting over at 34 as a private in a foreign army. The cause mattered more than the setbacks. There's a version of this story that makes him a tragic figure, the man who always ended up on the losing side. But that's not how the men who served with him saw it. What they saw was someone who refused, under any circumstances, to quit. Someone who, when there were 100 men against 4,000 and no good option, looked at the terrain and found a way. He's buried under an American name, in American ground, in the most honored military cemetery in the United States. The headstone doesn't say Lauri, it says Larry, but the symbol Raya left on that hillside in Vietnam, the T with the lightning bolt, the mark of Detachment Törni, was Finnish. Maybe that's the honest version, a man who belonged fully to more than one place, who gave everything he had to more than one cause, and who, in the end, was claimed by the country that finally gave him a home. A white granite headstone, Section 60, Arlington. Larry Thorne. That's where he rests now, the soldier who never stopped. I'm Dave. Thanks for watching. If this kind of history matters to you, hit subscribe, leave a comment, tell me who you think I should cover next. I'll see you in the next one.
Oh, Dave.